this week's Torah portion, God instructs the people that after entering the Holy Land, they are to appoint a Jewish king for themselves. No less than 400 years after entering the land, the Jewish people approached the prophet Samuel and requested that they be given a king like all the surrounding nations. You'd think that Samuel would commend them for finally getting their act together by asking for a king. But instead, Samuel rebukes them and angrily equates their simple request for a king with rejection of Hashem himself. This begs the question, if appointing a king is a commandment from Hashem himself, why the angry reaction upon their desire to fulfill the will of God? The famous biblical commentator of the 16th century, known as the Kli Yakar, offers a novel solution by simple analysis of the words used in both contexts. When God instructs the people to appoint a king, he says, "When you come to the land that Hashem gives you and possess it and settle it, and you will say, I will set a king over myself, then you shall set a king over yourself, whom your God shall choose." 400 years later, when the people approached Samuel with a desire to appoint a king, they said, "Give us a king to judge us like all the nations." Not set a king over ourselves, but give us a king to judge us like all the nations. The difference is obvious. The purpose of the Jewish king was to guide and direct the people how to better serve God. Setting a king over myself means that we are willing to truly accept the king as our guide, our leader, and we are willing to be subservient to his will. Even when it may appear that we know better, we will set the king over myself, believing that he has our best interests in mind and that he will lead us to what is ultimately for our good. This kind of king is not there for convenience. In fact, he can be very inconvenient at times, often pushing us to do things that we feel are unnecessary. But we are nonetheless willing to follow because we know that he knows better. This is the kind of approach to a king that God wanted us to have. But asking the prophet to give us a king was the exact opposite. Here the request was for a king, but for one who would function as a figurehead only. Samuel sensed that the people wanted a king for convenience purposes only, like all the other nations. He saw that they were uninterested in having someone who would actually show them the way, in having a guide, a leader. On the contrary, they wanted a king who would be given to them, a king who would appear as a king, but in reality be nothing more than a puppet, given over and subservient to those who had appointed him. The word parent is not only a noun, it is also a verb, to parent one's child. Parenting is not a popularity contest where we look to be best buddies with our kids by sitting as the figurehead at the top of the dinner table, given over and subservient to our kids' desires and calls. Parents are not designed to be puppets. Parents need to guide, not be guided by kids. We need to lead and not be led. We need to have clearly defined goals of what is for the overall good of our kids and draw our kids after us in that direction. We obviously need to be constantly sensitive to our children's specific needs, but we shouldn't be afraid to move in the direction of what we think is for their overall good. With this approach and God's help, we will succeed. Good Shabbos.